Let's be real for a second. When you think of the Wild West, what comes to mind? Probably cowboys, saloon fights, and epic standoffs, right? Well, today we're going to dive into a part of American history that pop culture usually gets wrong or just ignores completely. We're talking about the brutal, complex world of frontier conflict, and specifically, a story you almost never hear. What happened to captive women, told from the perspective of their Native American captors. So welcome. We're about to explore the stories from the margins, the ones that challenge everything you think you know. And here's the first surprise. For many Native tribes, the rules for handling prisoners were surprisingly consistent, whether that prisoner was from a rival tribe or a group of white settlers. Our goal here is to get past the stereotypes and uncover the nuanced human reality of this history. Let's get into it. Okay, so to set the scene, the period of colonial expansion was, to put it mildly, a chaotic and violent time. When worlds collide like that, the consequences are always grim. For captives, your fate was basically a roll of the dice. If you were a child taken in a raid, you might be killed on the spot. But if you survived, you could be fully adopted into the tribe and raised by a new family as one of their own. For captured men, the outcomes were just as varied. You might be held as a bargaining chip for ransom, or you could face a pretty gruesome death after a battle. But there were exceptions. Take the Spanish explorer Alvar Núñez Cabeza de Vaca. He and his men were captured in the 1500s, but because they knew a thing or two about medicine, they ended up becoming respected healers. They didn't just survive. They actually gained a kind of honored status, which, if you think about it, is an incredible story of adaptation. Okay, so that's men and children. But what about the women? This is where the story really flips the script on our expectations. You might assume the worst, but often, female captives were shown a surprising degree of respect. In fact, young women and girls were often seen as incredibly valuable. And this wasn't just a fluke. There are so many accounts of these young women not just fitting in, but actually rising to positions of power. The most famous example is Cynthia Ann Parker. She was captured by the Comanches as a little girl, but she didn't just assimilate, she thrived. She married a powerful war chief, Peta Nocona, and was the mother of Quanah Parker, who would become the last great leader of his people. And get this, when she was rescued and forcibly returned to her white family decades later, she spent the rest of her life trying to escape and get back to the Comanches. They were her family, her home. Or consider Mary Jemison, taken by the Seneca. She married, had children, and when given the chance to return to colonial society later in life, she said, "No thanks." She chose to live out her days with her adopted people. But before we paint too rosy a picture, we need to be clear. This wasn't a universal fairy tale. For some women, captivity was a living nightmare. And for those who were captured when they were a bit older, resentment could fester into a burning need for revenge. This brings us to the brutal counterpoint. A teenager named Matilda Lockhart. The abuse she suffered at the hands of her Comanche captors filled her with rage. In 1840, during what was supposed to be a peace meeting, her testimony about her horrific treatment lit the fuse that ignited the infamous Council House fight, a bloody massacre that destroyed any chance for peace. Her story is a gut-wrenching reminder that for every story of assimilation, there's another one of trauma and violence. And this might be the most counterintuitive part of the whole story. Despite those instances of cruelty, there was a deep-seated cultural rule in many native nations against the sexual assault of female prisoners. It was widely seen as dishonorable. In fact, pointless violence against any captive was generally looked down upon. So if you didn't want to join the tribe or marry a warrior, what happened? Well, usually it came down to business. It basically created a grim marketplace for people. Women, especially, were often captured with the specific goal of being ransomed. There were even specialized traders who would act as go-betweens, negotiating a captive's release for a price. And here's another key point. You weren't usually forced to join the tribe. The offer was there, but if you said no, you just had to wait for someone to pay your ransom. This brings us to the idea of adoption. Young women were often brought into the household of a chief and were valued for their resilience and their ability to build new family ties. Marrying a captive to a great warrior was seen as a high honor for everyone involved. Cynthia Ann Parker's story shows us just how deep these new bonds could go. The fact that she and many others like her fought to return to their captors after being freed presents this really challenging idea that for some women, life in a so-called savage society was actually freer and offered more respect than the civilized world they came from. Think about that. Even after being torn away, Cynthia's final wish was simply to be buried with her Comanche people. But to really get a feel for how wild and unpredictable this could all get, we need to talk about the Oatman sisters. Their story has it all: tragedy, horror, and a twist you won't see coming. It starts in 1851 with what's now known as the Oatman Massacre. The family was heading to California when they were attacked by a group of warriors, probably Yavapai. It started as a request for food and exploded into violence. The entire family was killed except for two sisters, 14-year-old Olive and 7-year-old Mary Ann, who were taken captive. Their brother Lorenzo was left for dead, but in a true miracle, he survived. What happened to the girls was horrifying. The Yavapai treated them like slaves. For a year, their life was a nightmare of forced labor and constant, humiliating abuse. Olive later said she lived in constant fear that any day could be their last. And then, after a year of this hell, a twist of fate. A group of Mojave traders came to the village. When they learned about the two captive girls, they didn't hesitate. They negotiated a trade, probably for some horses and blankets, and essentially bought the sisters' freedom. And just like that, everything changed. Olive and Mary Ann were taken in by the Mojave chief and his wife, who adopted them as their own daughters. The slavery and fear were replaced with affection and care. Olive even said they were treated better than the chief's own children. And in a powerful sign of acceptance, they were given the traditional blue chin tattoos, a permanent mark of belonging. Now their new home was on a major trade route, and white people passed through all the time, but the sisters never once tried to leave. They had found a new life. Tragically, a terrible drought hit the region, and Olive's little sister, Mary Ann, died of starvation. Around that same time, word got out to the U.S. military that there was a white girl living with the Mojaves. An ultimatum was sent: hand over the girl, or we will destroy your village. Can you imagine that choice? A 19-year-old Olive was forced to decide between her own future and the survival of the people who had saved her. The Mojaves begged her to lie, to pretend she wasn't American. They even painted her skin to hide her identity. But as the negotiations unfolded, she made a choice. She spoke in broken English and revealed the truth. The military man was furious at the deception. In the chaos that followed, some of the Mojave warriors wanted to kill Olive for her betrayal, but her adoptive father, the chief, stood in their way and saved her life. And just like that, after 5 years, Olive Oatman was thrust back into the world she had left behind. And here's the haunting final chapter. In the years that followed, there were rumors, later denied, that Olive secretly longed for a Mojave husband and 2 sons she'd been forced to leave behind. She went on to marry and live a seemingly normal life, but people who knew her remarked that she was haunted by a deep sadness. They said she never, ever smiled a real smile. Her story leaves us with this powerful, unanswered question. Did returning to her old life trap her in a way that captivity never did? Did she leave her only chance at true happiness behind? So what do you think? It's a complicated piece of history, and there are no easy answers. Thank you for diving into this with me. If you're into uncovering the stories that history forgot, make sure you subscribe. Drop a comment below and let me know what we should investigate next. And don't forget to check out our other deep dive right here.